A number of states are legalizing cannabis while addressing the legacy of marijuana prosecutions. We have been looking at how some states are handling this, but pot is still illegal under federal law. Let's continue now with a congresswoman who proposes to change that. Nancy Mace is a Republican from South Carolina. Her district is in the Charleston area, and she is sponsoring the States Reform Act, a Republican-led bill to decriminalize marijuana. Representative Mace, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me this evening.
What made you decide to sponsor this bill? What is it about legalization that's important to you?
Well, this is an issue that I worked on in the state legislature. I was a state lawmaker for 3 years before coming to Congress. I'm a freshman member of Congress. It's actually Republicans in the state of South Carolina who are working on cannabis reform, specifically the Compassionate Care Act for medical cannabis in South Carolina. And this particular issue is personal to me. I was raped when I was 16. I dropped out of school. I became a waitress at a Waffle House. I learned some really tough lessons during some very tough times and learned the value of hard work during that time. But I also learned about prescription drugs, and I was prescribed an antidepressant that made my depression worse. And I quit taking that prescription drug and I started using cannabis for a brief period of time in my life. And I attribute my survival of this very traumatic experience with the ability to have access to cannabis. And it's much different back then than it is today because there's fentanyl on the streets. And there are a number of different reasons why we need to do this at the federal level to allow states to control how they do or do not do cannabis in each respective states. And that's what essentially what the States Reform Act does. And I talk to a lot of people, whether it's veterans with PTSD, whether it's folks that have epilepsy, there are any number of reasons, cancer, end of life, et cetera, to be able to have access and opportunity to this. And as the gentleman that you had on here earlier today, the opportunity that's out there for folks who've been wrong. This has been a very, very expensive, very long, very painful, and very harmful war on a plant, and it's time to end it.
I appreciate you sharing your personal story. I'm so sorry that you went through that, but I'm grateful to you for telling us about that. And I think that clarifies for me, Congresswoman Mace, a bit of your rationale. It sounds like more of your reasoning for this has to do with the potential medicinal benefits of cannabis as an alternative to some medications for treating, in your case, depression, as opposed to the more recreational use argument behind legalization.
Right. And the beauty of the States Reform Act is that your state could legalize it for anything that it wants, whether that's recreational or medical use. Like in Florida, they have medical cards. In Colorado, California, Oregon, et cetera, and 15 other states, they have full adult use. The beauty of the States Reform Act is it could be state by state. There are only 3 states in the country that have no CBD or no cannabis whatsoever. And one of those states is getting ready to go from zero to medical. And so we need to have a framework, a regulatory framework that treats cannabis like alcohol, which is the States Reform Act, that gives states the power and the control to implement cannabis and in whatever way, shape, or form they want, or they can prohibit it. But at this point, there are only 2 states that have nothing at this juncture. And it's past time that the federal government get out of the way of what's already been happening in 47 of 50 states for, in some cases, almost or over 2 decades.
You know what, Congresswoman, I think I need to clarify the way we characterized your bill up front. I think we misspoke. It sounds like the way you want to go about this, as you just said, is allowing states to treat cannabis as they see fit, more like alcohol, where from state to state, if you live in the Northeast, Pennsylvania regulates it very differently than New Jersey, than New York. Like across state lines, it can vary, as opposed to nationwide legalization. Those sound like two different things. I just want to make sure we characterize your bill right.
Yeah. And the way that we talk about it, I think, is really important, because the only way that you can have cannabis reform at the federal level is you have to have Republicans on board. In fact, you've got to have 10 Republicans in the U.S. Senate. And so when we're talking about this issue, it's how do we do it in a bicameral and bipartisan way? What kind of legislation will guarantee that it can pass and get sent to the president's desk for signage? Now, the U.S. House just passed the MORE Act. It does not have Republican support in the Senate. And so it's really essentially dead on arrival. It's still to be determined, TBD, whether or not Senator Schumer does his own variation of legislation. And so the only bill left standing is the States Reform Act. And that's the way that you get Republicans and Democrats on board. I don't have the social equity components that the MORE Act has, but we have expungement and release, and we leave social equity up to the states, because the government closest to the people is a government that governs best. And we've got to have low taxes. As a gentleman from California said earlier in your program, he's there to have a business and make a profit, and the taxes are very high. And he is targeted by illegal markets and those that are doing cannabis business illegal. And we've got to keep taxes very low so that these folks who are trying to have this opportunity and create a business and create a life for themselves, a quality of life, they can survive and have a legally operating business. And when you treat cannabis like alcohol is treated nationwide, state by state, that opportunity is there. And it essentially is turnkey because you have a framework that's already existed with alcohol for decades now, and would make this really essentially legal overnight, state by state.
I kind of hear you in terms of the state by state approach. And I tend to think that states would kind of move in that direction anyway. I mean, there's a Rasmussen poll that puts Republican support for national marijuana legalization at 54% right now, Democratic support at 68%. So the tide has already kind of turned in that direction. Let me get to a few comments from our viewers before I got to let you go. Cecil emailed, after I had a heart attack, the positive effects of cannabis became an important component of my recuperation. Such a change can only be described as life-changing. Art emailed, although I think people who have genuine medical issues that need marijuana for medical use is fine, what these people need to realize is, even though they can use marijuana for medical purposes, they do not have the right to blow smoke in other people's faces or get others high. Before we go, Congresswoman, I wonder what your sense is of the continually evolving views on cannabis. I think that's partly why it's made so many people, not everyone for sure, but a critical mass of people so upset that Congress has not found a way to do this yet, has not found a way to just kind of get with the times.
Yes, and it is frustrating when you hear about people who are sick or ill, particularly in my family. I had a recent diagnosis of a member of my family who's sick, and it makes me angry that there is something that is out there that they could take and help them through their illness. And I can't get them access to it legally. It's very frustrating. But what I have seen, and I'm a conservative in a swing district, but I don't represent just conservatives. And in bright red South Carolina, in the 1st Congressional District, the vast majority of people want full adult recreational use. And I polled the reddest and most conservative Republican primary voters in my district, and almost 2/3 of them support the rights of states to legalize or prohibit the use of cannabis in any form that people want, that voters of that state want. And so when you start to look at this and realize that it's got to be done in a bipartisan way, there is a path to doing it, and that is responsible, that protects kids, that protects veterans, but that protects those with serious illnesses. We can do this. And I encourage folks to look up the States Reform Act and learn for yourselves and how we can do it in both chambers, both the US Senate and the House, and work together, finally find something that will unite us rather than divide us. And this is one of those places.
It's so interesting to hear a very different argument on the left in terms of legalization, in terms of social equity and, you know, the changing times, as opposed to your argument as a conservative in terms of what I guess we could broadly call compassionate use, kind of in that sort of thread of political thought about that allowing states to also make their own decisions, kind of like alcohol. I'll be very interested to see where this goes from here. But for now, Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina, I really appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.